Rosario Quiroz Villarreal, Director on TNTP's Policy and Advocacy Team. At TNTP, we recognize the transformational power of centering the student experience and voice. We've witnessed it shift the game in the research for our 2018 report, The Opportunity Myth, where students helped us understand what real, tangible changes school systems can make to provide more students with school experiences that are meaningful, honor their aspirations, and give them a chance to meet their goals. We are committed to continuing to uplift, honor, and make space for student voice. In that spirit, I am so excited for tonight's conversation, the first of a three-part series where students are taking over TNTP's Passing the Mic platform to share their vision for what's presently needed to ensure they are equipped by their education for economic mobility. We have partnered with Our Turn, a nonprofit organization with over 5,000 student members, mobilizing, organizing, and leading to ensure student voices are heard. This three-part series will be facilitated by Tamara Morgan, a senior high school student in Atlanta, Georgia, and executive fellow for Our Turn. She'll lead through conversations with fellow students that will provide insight on what students are currently thinking and get district and school leaders to clear action steps to make space for student voice. Tamara, thank you for your leadership. I'm looking forward to learning from you and your peers. With that, I'll pass it to you.
Hello, everybody. I'm so glad you guys are here. It's so great to have everybody here. My name is Tamara Morgan. I am 18 years old and an executive fellow with Our Turn from Atlanta, Georgia. Today, Our Turn is taking over TNTP's Passing the Mic for our second conversation where we'll dig into and share about the student agenda for district leaders and teachers. It's honestly no question that student voices need to be elevated and heard. It's so easy for adults to say that children are our future, but we never get a chance to talk about what would be good for our futures. Today, we dig into exactly what students have been voicing they want from their schools and to prepare for our futures. With all of that being said, I would also love to get into these inspiring and amazing students that we have here on the call today. Salma, I would love to start with you.
Thank you, Tamara. My name is Salma Perez. I identify as Indigenous Zapoteca. My family's origins come from Oaxaca, Mexico. I grew up in Los Angeles in a charter school, more specifically a community-based school, which has really inspired me to share just the knowledge around culturally inclusive curriculum, as well as a cultural relevant pedagogy. And I'm excited to go into the conversation and learn more about our student agenda and how that aligns to our experiences and what we expect from our education system. Thank you.
Alan?
Yeah, hello, my name is Alan Antonio. I'm Mexican-American. I also have roots from Oaxaca. And I'm currently a college student at work for Our Turn. And I'm very excited to be here. I lived in Koreatown. It's a subsection of LA. And I think that growing up here has really just helped me kind of shift my views in terms of just seeing kind of like the issues. I think growing up, we had different schools like in kind of like the same area, but we're significantly different in terms of just resources and just a lot of other stuff. And so, it's just interesting kind of like seeing how, even though you're in the same neighborhood, depending on the school you go to, you might have access to very different, just even resources or classes or, stuff like that. So yeah, just excited to be here and talk about the LA student agenda and just other stuff.
Great. Thank you both for sharing and introducing yourselves. So let's just jump right into it. To say that COVID-19 has offended public education would be an understatement. Many have said that we're all in this together, but from the beginning, we have seen disenfranchised communities have carried a disappropriate burden. A recent report by McKinsey stated that students in majority Black schools ended the 2020-2021 school year 6 months behind in both math and reading. While students in majority white schools ended up just 4 months behind in math and 3 months behind in reading. The issues leading to an ever-growing divide are numerous. for limited access to quality teachers and resources to heightened anxiety and challenges to mental health. While it was clear that they weren't all in this together, students across the country saw an opportunity to come together in a unique way. Alan, how did the pandemic and demands for racial justice on the national stage create a need for young people to lead us out of the old norm?
I mean, I think it was just very evident that when this transition happened, well, one, it was very rapid, but two, it was, I think, very shocking and also just like life changing in the sense that before the problems that you did have before COVID, like everything just tripled basically, right? Because we all know that students are not just students, right? We're expected to take on multiple roles, especially like if you are like like if you have more siblings or if you're low income or etc. or just different things that we have. And so I think to answer the question, it was very evident that I think especially these younger generations are able to kind of just take in more information, and I think just be very more observant. And I think we were just also kind of like maybe I don't want to say raised, but I think learn to stand up a bit more for ourselves in terms of being like unapologetic about the things we want and we hope to see change. And so I think that, through just honestly, even looking back at history, every generation, like the youth has led those movements for change. And so this time around, since the youth were really the ones who were, like everyone, of course, went through it, but since they were going through education, it's like, it was just evident that they were the ones who had to bring up this change, and just advocate for themselves. Because really, if they weren't going to do it, then there was going to be these, people with decision-making power who have not been in school, who have not gone through the system, who are going to be making all these changes and who are going to be saying, oh, this is how things should be done, even though we're not really attending school at the moment. And so, that's why it was super important for youth to at least lead that and bring about this change.
That you said that, Alan, because this next point will really drive your point home. It's clear that we need to create a new normal for students, and that belief isn't only held by youth. A majority of teachers believe that education should be reimagined with an equity lens, while 2/3 of parents say schools should be focused on rethinking how educate students. Yet, we would get anywhere if the same old decision makers of the past were trying to make decisions for the future. In spring 2020, our turn conducted a national survey of youth to understand the experiences during the pandemic, and 3/4 of students reported that they were not consulted by their schools when decisions were being made. Salma, why is authentic student engagement so important and different? In the context of reimagining education, what does it look like?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I would say that to engage authentically with students, it's definitely listening to their needs. And I think because of the pandemic, it just brought in a lot of emotions of empathy and compassion in ways that we haven't seen before, as well as grief. So I would say that I think to engage with students, it's really about sitting down individually one-on-one with every student if possible. And what that would just create like that wave of, imagine if we were to sit down one-on-one with each student and gather their experience and see how we can support, especially through a lens of equity. It's really about looking at those communities and students that have been historically disenfranchised and have not had any resources, if so limited. I think also just mental health, I think, has been a big sector of the conversation of what authentic connecting with students in general is really getting to know their emotional well-being, and how that definitely has an influence in their environment and their relationships with their student or with other students, with their teachers, with their staff. I think it's really on each school individually to really get to know the families and the students that they are holding and providing education for. I think when I think about school and growing up, you're always told like school is like your second home. Yet there's a lot of students that don't feel seen or don't feel heard. So I think to me that is the key in these authentic conversations with students. It's really getting to know what their needs are individually and collectively, but also taking care of their emotional well-being. So it seems to me that what we need in schools is also like a holistic approach, whether that be meditation or, breathing exercises, and just teaching young people and young kids how to regulate their bodies and their emotions and the space that they take up, and how to be comfortable in that, because generationally we've been conditioned to make ourselves small, to really believe that the education system, whether we might think it's flawed or not, we sometimes don't even question it because it's just what is given to us and it's always been that way. So I think right now we really are in the thick of reimagining what that looks like. And I think in my perspective, it includes accountability on the adults and the schools and the institutions, but also authentic connecting with students and doing everything we can to give them a voice, whether that be physically or just holding space, whether that be through clubs or counselors, but definitely thinking beyond what we have been provided in the public school system.
That's amazing, Salma. Thank you so much. Now what we're getting ready to do is move on to the question is, what is the student agenda and where's it going? So once again, thank you both so much for sharing such eye-opening stories and calls to action. We have a powerful once-in-a-generation opportunity to reimagine education. And now is the time to walk the talk when it comes to equity and youth engagement. The status quo is firmly entrenched. Consider these data points from a report by the Center of American Progress. Only 10 states require at least one student member on their state board of education, and those only 5 give these members full voting power. A 2018 survey also found that school board demographics are not reflective of students they represent, with 78% of school board members identifying as white and a majority reporting an annual household income of $100,000 to $200,000. In comparison, only 46% of K through 12 students are white, and almost 58% qualify for free or reduced price lunch. Salma, as the harsh truths of the pandemic set in, we collectively realized that talk isn't enough. We must take action. How did the idea of the student agenda come about, and how was it created?
Yeah, well, I would say it definitely took a lot of conversation. I think that was really the foundation of creating the student agenda, as well as I think through our experience on Zoom and just Zoom, we've been able to connect with students across the country, and it really allowed for us to see the different experiences people are having, as well as the parallels happening. And there is a clear call for healthier environments and healthier relationships between the institutions and the education system with the families that they serve. I would say that a lot of the agenda and like the pillars that have come from them is definitely based around data and survey that I think our turn has ran. I know that I work closely with the team here in Los Angeles, and we ourselves are also driving an agenda here within LAUSD. So we also did our own survey, and it was super clear that students want culturally inclusive curriculum. Students want mental health services. This is what they're asking for. And not only that, you do have adult allies, whether they be teachers and staff members, that agree with them and resonate with that, and they themselves might need those resources as well. So I would say that with our turn, the student agenda came about just through the conversations that we were all having, but then also like thinking of it from a political place, and being politically conscious is a whole other layer as young people to be equipped. And I think at our turn, we just want to share that. We want to better share how to equip young people with the ability to think, and strategize and think from a lens of understanding that policies and politics is a lot of what shapes our reality, and what we get to experience. And I think that definitely is it all depends state by state, because I know that we have students across the country that are experiencing book bans, and the frustrations around that and how real that is. Yet here in California, I would say that I think we think it's very progressive or very liberal. And so that's not the reality we're faced with. But now I'm having to think about other people's experiences outside of California, where it's like, whoa, like a simple book ban. And even to think that book ban should not be happening today. And just the healing that comes with words and poetry, whether that be a book, and just knowing that that is something that is being taken and banned, then it just makes you think about what other experiences other folks might be having. So I think at our turn, it was definitely about inviting everyone to the conversation at any point of the developing of the student agenda that really helped it shape to what it is today.
That's great, Salma. Thank you so much. For too long, youth have followed the lead and sometimes the orders of adults in charge. With the student agenda, we have an unprecedented framework for creating a pro-youth, pro-equity education system. My question to the both of you is, what is included in the student agenda and how are they reflective of your experiences? Alan, I'll have you go first.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think the student agenda is really kind of like our North Star guiding star, in the sense that we truly believe that this is something that has the potential to change the education system in terms of fitting it and shaping it a bit more better for students. And we think that it's 5 things. It's like 5 pillars. And, we think these are really critical. The first one being nothing about us without us. And that one's generally more about representation, in the sense that, earlier you said a statistic about that 72%, I think, of the board members that represent schools are white, right, Caucasian. And so the reality is that, it's not like that for the whole nation, right? We have students of color, and so we want to see a type of representation. The next one is learning centered on justice. And for this specific pillar, it's about being real, right, in terms of how we learn things, even our history. I think a lot of the times we shy away from, the cold truth that is the U.S. and how it was brought up, and on, the backs of who it was built, right? That being, Black folk, immigrant folk, and just even, what happened to our Native American population, and I think we shy away from that because we want to like somehow forget or cover up the past. And I think by doing that, we really just create some type of distorted image of what we truly are. And I think it's really important just to specifically, just have just be affirmative with just our history, because if we just slide it under, and if we don't really talk about that and we forget about it, we're prone to making the same mistakes. And that's what we want to avoid. What we really want to do is take that in, right, and just acknowledge it and just heal, right, because the process and the journey to healing starts by acknowledgement. And just, learning centered on justice, itself is just being able to also elect, critical leaders and just all that stuff. The next one is prioritize our mental health. And so for this one, I think it's super important. During that pandemic, it was evident that a lot of people weren't having interactions the same way they were used to. So for a lot of people, that brought them into a bubble or into a hole. And for those people who were very maybe shy or timid or had anxiety, it made it even worse because now they had zero to no social interaction. And so on top of that, you'd also have to face the reality of what was going on during the pandemic, and what's still kind of going on today, right? Some kids had to prioritize maybe taking up a job to help their family, and school wasn't really a priority, and they were mostly focused on survival, or when people got COVID. I remember that actually in the beginning of that pandemic, my family got COVID. And so my mom was actually sent to the hospital for a week, and it was just super scary because at the time we had no clue what COVID really was or how dangerous it was, and so it's like when those type of things happens, your shift really just changes, and so it's like maybe education is not a super priority at the moment, right? And like a priority now is, oh man, will my family be okay? I have to take up another job, like my siblings, myself. And so, it's just a whole spiral. And so with that, a lot of times mental health is really not addressed, right? But it's super critical, I think, just to the involvement of a student. And so really prioritize that pillar, it's super important in terms of making sure that students have supports to just even basic needs, to be able to really address that. Because if you don't address that, then even more problems can come in spiral. Another one is our schools, our culture. And so for this pillar, it's specifically kind of what it sounds, right? I think just really basing off your school and even your learning based on the type of people you have around you and the type of people who are represented of that, and it's important, I think, to highlight culture, right? Just bringing it back to the conversation earlier, I was talking about sometimes how we have try to hide things or just put it under the carpet. I feel like sometimes the US has tried to be like, oh, we're actually just all one, but in reality, it's like there is no really like a one size fits all type of, solution or answer, because I think it's important to acknowledge the people that we do have in the US, and how special that is, but not only acknowledge it, but also, how you said, right? Not just walk the walk. I mean, not just talk the talk, but also walk the walk, in the sense of really highlighting and showing all of that. And so our last, but really not least, is fully invest in our futures. And again, this is super important because it's really about the youth. It's like a lot of the times we claim that, the leaders tomorrow are students, but yet we have a school system that hasn't changed over the past how many years, and honestly, because of that, sometimes a lot of students either, don't find their way, or the school system really cheats them. And it's like, how can we claim that we really care about the leaders of tomorrow when we don't give them enough, fundings, or when we don't really kind of center what would be the best way for them to learn or advance, right? And I think most acknowledging that while education is important, that there are other means to achieve, your goals, or in the sense of even like technical things, a lot of times like the four-year education is promoted, right? In the sense of graduate, immediately go to 4-year, right? But I've seen a lot of like my friends, and even just statistically, some kids that, especially that come from low income backgrounds, that they can be doing really well in their school, and then they go to 4-year, and then for some reason they fall behind, right? But that's actually because what they didn't know is that their school wasn't actually fully equipped to prepare them for sometimes these higher institutional places, right? And so because of that, they either fall back, or they there's just a lot of side effects that come with that. But it's really, fully investing in our future is about equipping just students with the things that they need to truly thrive and survive. And yeah, and Salma, would you want to speak over some other pillars?
Yeah, I would say that the pillar that resonates with me the most would definitely be learning centered on justice. Only because in my experience, I grew up in a school that implemented and worked towards implementing a cultural relevant curriculum, as well as the pedagogy itself at the school was just highly driven by Indigenous autonomy, understanding of our worldview through an Indigenous lens, and understanding that Indigenous peoples exist all throughout North America and really globally. So in my experience, I have learned that cultural relevant education is beyond just social studies class. And like you said, Ellen, it's also acknowledging that learning through cultural relevant curriculum is also way beyond the classroom. It's, in my experience, I think it's establishing honest, accountable, and harmonious organism of governance within the school, which has been a fundamental element of the school that I grew up in, which is Anahuac International Preparatory of North America. And it's a small charter school here based in LA. But it really hones in on community and that everyone is an active participant of the teaching and learning experience. So whether that means like meeting with parents regularly, monthly, to really check in and say, what is it that you all would want on the curriculum? Having those kinds of conversations very early on in a child or student's experience really allows for engagement between the family and the school itself. I also feel like through culturally relevant curriculum, again, it's not just creating structure of classes, and calling it a day and saying, we've solved the issue, but it's really teaching young people how to think critically, and really providing them with also the staffing that can reflect that experience for them, that can share those experiences in a way that again brings in healing and brings in knowledge from the place of the heart, which I think knowledge and teaching is so much more beyond just a school. You're constantly learning, you're constantly teaching, whether that you're an older sibling or a friend, and I think at least for me and my upbringing at the school that I attended, culture really was at the center of things. And I think I kind of just want to outline these 4 different key elements to that was maternal language. So also understanding that it's these institutions, often policies, we have, at least here in California, we've had policies that really prevented Spanish speaking children from speaking Spanish in the classrooms, and that was something that, was, then you go into the EL English learners programs and how under-resourced they are. And not only that, I think about immigrant children sometimes that are in these institutions, yet, they might not even know Spanish. Maybe all they know is their maternal language because of their origin country or, homelands. So maternal language has also been a key role at the school that I attended. They taught Nawa, K through 12. And then also just education and universal access for Indigenous children of all. Again, global. I think when we think about education, it's so much more globally than we like to think about it, just like at a national scale. So those are just like a few things that I think are relevant to my experience when I think about culturally and relevant curriculum. I feel like there's so many opportunities to incorporate the communities that are the foundation of where our schools are located. So turning and going into, building relationships with tribal offices and really getting to know the original homelands and territories that we occupy. I think a big part of even undoing, what white supremacy has, or how white supremacy has been embedded into our institutions, really is getting to familiarize ourselves with the settler colonial aspects of our reality, as well as colonialism and how that's affected, our lives and how it still continues, and the violence. Because erasure in our schools is not something new. It's very intentional. Education and institutions were often designed to assimilate. So that's really what we need to start, either the conversations, but taking action around how do we undo that. So at least here in Los Angeles, for us, that means going through the process of decolonizing and getting familiar with what that means, because decolonizing could be something that takes place in different forms. You can decolonize your health, whether that be going plant-based. You could decolonize different parts of ourselves that are very influenced by Euro standard or Eurocentric perspectives, which is a lot of what the education system has relied on. So yeah, that's a little bit of how it resonates with my experience, at least with our agenda, and the creation of it was a lot of thinking on my end of how do I share what I learned, and how do we allow other young people to feel equipped to take on these conversations. They're not easy conversations, to call out colonialism and the violence that we experience on the day-to-day, and being able to share that. So definitely learning centered on justice.
You guys have amazing experiences that are blowing my mind right now. Like, I just love how you guys are so open to sharing them and giving others, also giving them a voice, so to speak, I just love that. So my last question before we wrap everything up, how will you both know when the student agenda is coming to life, and what does success look like? Alan, I'll start with you and then we can pass it on to Salma.
Oh man, success. I mean, I think for sure, like the first steps are obviously getting it out there, because I think that these pillars are something super crucial that when you really look into them deeply and break them down, you're like, wow, these are things that we really need to implement. But I think truly in terms of like just success, I think, and like my wildest, just thoughts, it'd be making sure that these things are implemented in every school, right? Kind of seeing this in every school in terms of representation, what someone was talking about, right? Like an inclusive curriculum and just, all that. And I think that it truly be, if you'd be able to implement this in every school and, hoping that, like justice in terms of education and equity would be there, right? In terms of just being fully representative of a kid, and making sure that the school is able to truly, kind of just shift itself to be able to provide the best education possible and the best resources and tools possible for the student, right? And for the leaders of tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a great question when we think about success with our student agenda. I think what comes up for me first is like for each pillar on our student agenda, we have key outlines. So for example, for nothing about us without us, what does that really mean? It means that we have voting student board members. I think the moment we start to see a shift, and we know that it's happening in a few states, but if we were to do that across the country, that in itself, I think will create a ripple effect of how we see the policy process taking place at the district level. Also, ongoing feedback cycles that we create and ensure that there are multiple opportunities for students to directly share feedback and experiences beyond speaking at school board meetings. So I think it really calls on elected officials to really build relationships with young people in the organizations that they are collaborating with, or even the schools themselves. And accessible board meetings, I think, is another key element that I feel at a national level, we need to be engaging our communities in the board meetings, even though we know that they're public. A lot of the times they're inaccessible. And oftentimes it's really easy to lose track of the conversations being held at the table. And so making that accessible, I think, for families and students, more importantly, to understand what are the issues being discussed every day at these board meetings. When we think about learning centered on justice, we think about authentic evaluation. So school districts will conduct internal audits to assess and evaluate where current standards, curriculum, and teaching methods derive from. And, again, going back into the conversation around decolonizing, really taking a look at our textbooks and, calling on at a national level, to really evaluate, the material that is being distributed, and calling in other experiences and voices into those textbooks, if that's the case. Relevant courses, of course, is part of that. Strengthening student and teacher partnerships and shifting power dynamics. I think that's one of the key things that I would attribute to success with our student agenda, is to really see the shift in the power dynamics, to create classrooms where students and teachers are able to learn from one another, creating positive learning environments. My dream, I think I've shared this within the Our Turn team, is like, if we could just go into every school across the country and really assess what does the school need, that I think is coming from an equitable place, because we are looking at what each specific school needs. And not just like the general, we hear superintendents coming. I know LAUSD here in LA, we just got a new superintendent, and I've heard that he's been meeting with different schools, getting in on the ground. But I want to see more of that. I want to really know that he's visited all the schools and all of LAUSD. That would be great. And I think if we could do that across the country again is a part of that. But yeah, I think there's more pillars underneath our 5 pillars each have key elements to them that which you can read on our website that really outline what I think the success aspect of how we will see this come to life and the implementations that it will take. So a lot of it is definitely building a new processes and a new systems and in a way that includes students in that process. I see the question in the chat. Tamara, if you want to read it.
Of course. So we're just wondering if you all have any reflections about representation when it comes to having teachers of color. How does that impact students and teacher relationships?
Ellen, if you want to go first.
Hey, Salma, go ahead.
I'll keep this short, but I know in my experience, again, I grew up in a very small, tight-knit community. So my teachers definitely felt like family. A lot of them had really great relationships with my parents. So I would say that a lot of my teachers, were people of color. A lot of my teachers were Indigenous themselves or had Indigenous ties and roots. And I think in my experience, that representation, I think, really allowed me to grow into the person that I am today. I know that back when I was in middle school and elementary, there was still parts of me that felt, hidden, shy, reserved, or whatever the case might be. But I think because of my experience at my school, I slowly, was engaging with mentors and teachers that just wanted me to grow, that just want the best for their students. So I think for me, it's definitely like I had a really amazing art teacher until this day, we come across each other here and there. And, what I really took away from her was the inspiration of how she lives her life. And just like, the work that she does, whether it be through education, or, she's very much also in the arts. So I think for me, it was definitely like that role model. I think sometimes we don't think about how others are shaping our worlds, but definitely modeling that for young people is super important. So for me, it was just such a blessing to be able to grow up with staff and teachers that really allowed me to express myself. And, I felt seen and heard. And so I think that is what that representation kind of does is it impacts our students and teachers' relationships by allowing healthy and loving relationships. Again, kind of going back to how schools are like our second home, the people in that space should reflect that and should allow you to feel felt and seen and cared for.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Shelba. And just to add on, there's a phrase that goes like, you can't be what you can't see, right? And so with that, it's just that's why representation is so important, even if it's just in our teachers, because it's just important to see, people that represent you, just being teachers and also just really guiding you through the education system, right? Because it's just super important. I'm lucky enough to grow up in Koreatown, and here in Koreatown in LA, the majority of the population is Latino, Asian, and then basically Latino and Asian, also Bangladeshi. But with that, our teachers, I was also very fortunate that they were people of color. And so with that, I never really felt out of place. And I went through a K through 12 school. And so, we were kind of always really kind of close together because we just grew up together, going grade by grade. And we really had a good opportunity to make real connections with the teachers, right? And so much so that like they even after we graduated high school, they invited us to like their retirement parties, or when they were getting their masters, they invited us to like attend. And so it's just really important because also just culturally, sometimes some teachers just know what you might or might not be going through. Like I had a Spanish teacher in high school who was very, I think, just reflective of her own experience. She was like she immigrated to this country when she was younger, and she grew up low income. And so, my area was low income. And so sometimes, like, just even living in those areas or coming from a specific background, it's like there's certain challenges that you face and you go through, right? And that you kind of know. And so that's what's important, to have those people who kind of, not only look like you, but who can relate to your experiences, right? Because let's just say that you might work at night, right? And so you come to school tired, right? I think we need educators who are able to kind of pick that up and not just be like, oh, hey, you're lazy, that's why you're sleeping in my class, right? Or hey, you're going, or making assumptions, right? I think it's just important to have teachers who are able to relate to us, but also show us that, hey, this is possible, right? Like my Spanish teacher, once again, she would always share her story about how she immigrated here and how she really had to like hone down and focus. And it was like a very inspirational story of like, how she, went from even being bullied and just, a whole lot to now, teaching in a university and also, teaching in our high school. And just her story and always her sharing her journey really kind of helped us to, again, with that phrase, right? Like you can't be what you can't see. We were able to see her and be like, hey, you know what, it is possible to, first of all, go to higher education, and second of all, like be influential, right? Or be in a position where now you're influencing other people. And so, yeah.
Thank you both so much. And your contributions to everything have been amazing. Today, the student agenda continues to gain support and momentum. 14 national and local organizations and counting have endorsed the student agenda, signaling their support for a pro-youth, pro-equity future. But we know a framework is only the beginning. We have to continue to tell the stories of the youth who have been impacted by an unjust education system and how the student agenda represents a revolutionary path into the future. And we have to engage allies who truly want to fulfill the promise of the education system so we can collectively reimagine policies, funding, structures, relationships, and power dynamics. There is no silver lining to a pandemic, but we have a window of opportunity that we may never see again. It is our turn to be the voices that we want to hear and the change we want to see in the world. Thank you so much, Salma and Alan, for your participation and your sharing your amazing experience. You both are so inspiring and amazing students. Thank you, TNTP and Our Turn, for giving us the platform to share these amazing stories with these amazing students. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for joining us for Passing the Mic. We encourage you to keep the conversation going and for you to share your stories with us on social media using the hashtag #PassingTheMic_TNTP. We look forward to connecting with you during our next conversation. Until then, stay safe.